Hello and welcome to PsychBoost. In this video we'll be looking at the biological approach to explaining OCD. We'll be discussing the genetic and the neural explanations for OCD. We'll be using the key terms serotonin, basal ganglia system, gene 9, COMT gene and SERT gene. I'll mention evaluative research and I'll give you some ways to extend those evaluations. So let's start with the biological approach to explaining OCD. First up, the genetic explanation. So this suggests that OCD is inherited. If we talk about genes, we're getting them from our parents. We can talk about individual genes, we can talk about gene markers. If we have certain gene markers, this predicts the presence of OCD. Or we can say these gene markers are more likely in those people who have OCD. So there are individual genes. So we could name some, gene 9, COMT and SERT. These do seem to be present with people with OCD. That being said, there are as many as 230 separate genes that could be involved in some way in the development of OCD. This means the disorder is polygenetic. There isn't one OCD gene that is either turned on or turned off. It's far more complex than that. So in what other way do we know that genes might be implicated in OCD? We have family studies. Now in the general population, about 2% of us have OCD. But if you've got a first degree relative, say a parent or a sibling with OCD, your likelihood is 10%, 5 times higher than that 2% figure. So this might indicate a genetic basis of OCD. When we look at twin studies, the results are even stronger. The concordance rate, the likelihood that if one person has the disorder, that the other person will have the disorder. When we look at monozygotic twins, so twins that share 100% of genes, the concordance rate can be as high as 87%. And the study that's found this concordance rate, dizygotic twins or twins who share 50% of the genes, they had a concordance rate of 47%. So this really does seem to suggest that genes form a role in producing OCD symptoms. Genes aren't the whole story though, because the role of your genes is to code for some aspect of your biology. Neural explanation suggests these changes in your genes might impact the functioning of certain neural systems, so systems in your brain. The first explanation is low levels of serotonin. It's thought that one of the roles of serotonin is to prevent the repetition of tasks, and in the brains of people with OCD, it's either at too low a level, or potentially it's removed too quickly from synaptic systems, so before it's able to do its job of inhibiting the repetition of an action. So these low levels might result in obsessive thoughts. So beyond neurotransmitters, there are certain biological structures in the brain which have also been implicated in OCD. One structure is the basal ganglia. It's thought communication between this structure and others might be disrupted in people with OCD. A disorder you might have heard of, Parkinson's, is a disorder of the basal ganglia, and Parkinson's is linked to repetitive motor functions. Now it's found that if you cut the connection between the frontal cortex and the basal ganglia in people with severe OCD, this can reduce the symptoms. Other observations in OCD patients is access activity in the orbitofrontal cortex. So in the frontal cortex, whose connection we can sever to the basal ganglia. Now the orbitofrontal cortex is part of our systems in predicting the future and controlling impulses from the limbic system. So you can imagine how access activity in this area might lead to excessive concern about future events. What's also been observed is abnormal activity in an area called the parahippocampal gyrus. And this is an area that deals with the regulation of unpleasant emotions. And OCD certainly is quite an emotional disorder. If you'd like to read more about the genetic explanations in quite a lot more depth, and from quite an advanced scientific viewpoint, there's an open review on the genetics of OCD by Kim and Kim in 2006. You can find it by following the link I've put on the screen. So how about evidence? Well, research by Hu in 2006 identified genetic differences between 169 OCD sufferers and 253 controls. And these genetic differences impact the functioning of serotonin transporters in the brain. So this research supports both the genetic and the neural explanations. We might suggest that while we have evidence from family studies, and this evidence does seem to indicate a strong genetic link, we can't trust these studies completely, because these studies can't control for the influence of a shared environment, so factors like diet, but also aspects like social learning theory. If you're in a family household where the parent has OCD, there will be conversations and a general awareness about OCD as a disorder. That might make other family members more likely to seek treatment, making this genetic link seem higher than it really is. We might also suggest that the effectiveness of drug treatments, such as SSRIs, which we'll talk about in the next video, is a pretty good indication that the neural explanation is valid. If the drugs work, then maybe there's some truth to the theory. But this being said, just because the drugs that work on the serotonin system stop the symptoms, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily dealing with the root cause of the OCD. We might also criticize the biological explanation for OCD as being biologically deterministic. The biological explanation says OCD is down to completely uncontrollable gene and neuronal factors. If, however, we took a cognitive explanation and we say that OCD is due to faulty information processing, this approach would allow us to use conscious thought to challenge these irrational beliefs and reduce the symptoms of OCD ourselves, this being a soft determinist view. Another argument could be we might criticize OCD as being biologically reductionist. OCD is simply a genetic switch that's either on or off. But OCD is a very complex emotional experience. Biological explanations ignore the role of family members in the development of the disorder. Or they ignore cognitive explanations. And these cognitive explanations also provide effective treatments based on a more complex system of identifying irrational thought processes.
I really hope you found this video useful in studying psychology. 3 things help this channel grow a lot: likes, comments and subscriptions. Thank you so much if you've done any of those things for this video.